You are listening to
Rice, Beans, and Revolution, motherfucker.
That's right. Another episode of Rice, Beans, and Revolution coming at you from the mean streets of McAllen, Texas, 78501. And sadly, again, this week we are co-hostless. Angela couldn't be with us again. She's out, I guess, causing havoc all across the RGV. So go, Angela. Just, don't get caught. But we do have a very special guest for this episode. Let me go ahead and introduce Gabriel Sanchez.
Hi, how are you doing?
Hey, Gabriel. So, reason Gabriel is on today's episode is he's going to tell us a little bit about Pansy Pachanga, and it's an upcoming documentary that's currently in the works, but I'll let him go ahead and tell us a little bit more. So, tell us what it is and how the idea just kind of came to fruition.
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me to be on the show. I'm a fan. So
Awesome.
Yeah. So Pansy Pachanga, like you said, it's a documentary that's currently in the works. I've been working about it for about a year and a half with Charlie Vela and Ronnie Garza, who are the two folks responsible for making As I Walk Through the Valley. And I know you had them on a previous episode of your show.
They were actually on episode number 1.
Oh, sweet. I didn't know.
Yeah. I opened up the podcast show with them, so that's cool. I need to have those guys back on.
Yeah. Maybe we could all get together and do one once closer to when the movie's done.
Yeah. That'd be great.
Would be pretty dope. So I'm working on it with them. Ronnie is co-directing with me, and then Charlie's in a producer role. And we've been working pretty intensely on it for about a year and a half. It's taken a little longer to complete than we initially thought, but it's been a great experience working on it. And it kind of came to be out of some research that I started doing a few years ago, sort of trying to chronicle the oral history of the LGBTQ community here in the Rio Grande Valley. It started off with just some curiosity about what life had been like for previous generations of queer and trans people living here in the valley, because it was something I definitely didn't hear a lot about growing up, and I think that was something I wanted to remedy. A lot of times when queer people grow up in places like the valley, they tend to think that there's no one else like them, right? Or they don't know about the rich history we have down here. And so I wanted to do something to sort of counter that narrative and highlight, I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I just started doing a few interviews here and there, and then got connected to more people who had more information. And then from there, just sort of started building an increased knowledge of the history of the community here. About 2 years ago, about a year and some months ago, I wrote a series of articles for NETA for October, which is LGBTQIA plus History Month.
Real quick, I don't mean to interrupt, but for those who don't know what NETA is, can we just kind of...
So NETA is a multimedia platform that highlights creators and journalism here in the Rio Grande Valley. And so I wrote a series of articles for them about the history of the Valley's LGBT community. By that point, I think I'd done a bunch of interviews and had a lot of pictures and stuff, nowhere near what I have now, what I've amassed over the course of working on the movie. So I wrote a few articles about some of the early queer social spaces here, some of the first gay bars in the Valley, some of the first activist groups here in the Valley, and Charlie and Ronnie, who had, already by that point had released As I Walk Through the Valley, were sort of looking for an idea for their next project. They knew they wanted to do something local. As I Walk Through the Valley tells the history of the Valley's underground music scene and sort of the growth of punk rock and underground music here in the Valley. And they wanted to do something local and about, similarly like exploring the growth and the roots of a community. And so we got together and started talking about making Pansy, and that's where it grew out of.
Right. So I do remember. I don't know if it was the first time I heard about it, but so for those who don't know, I work at the public library, and I want to say 2 years ago you had an event there. I know you had one just recently, but you had an event there where you kind of gave I guess gave a a 101 on the history of the LGBT community here in the Valley. And I was working at the time, so I couldn't sit in on the entire thing, but I got to hear maybe like 5-10 minutes. And it was so like just so eye opening to me. Like, first of all, I'm a big history buff, and anything having to do with the Valley just kind of piques my curiosity. And especially when you hear these unheard stories, they really interest me. And when I heard you talking up there, I wish I could have sat in on the entire thing. But so another thing that you do is you go around and you do give the presentation.
Yeah.
Is that right?
So yeah, pretty much wherever they invite me to do it. But yeah, about 3 years ago, I think Valley AIDS Council and the South Texas Equality Project STEP collaborated with the McAllen Public Library to do a series of Pride Month presentations. There was ones on different topics. I believe that was in 2016, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds about right.
And they asked us to come and talk about, I think mine was the inaugural, like the sort of the kickoff one. And I just talked about the LGBT history of the Valley and what I knew up to that point. And I think at that point, I'd only done about 10, maybe at most like 8 or 9 interviews. And I already felt like there was a lot of information there. Mostly because a lot of the people I'd interviewed were people who were really involved in the community at different points in its existence. And I felt like I had a lot. But I knew that there was more, and that maybe, I don't want to say I'd only scratched the surface, but I think there was so much more to unearth still, and so many more stories to tell. And so this past year I did it again about 2 weeks ago. And this is after working on the movie, after having like a much bigger understanding of the history and the context in which it fits in, and some of the people who were, having interviewed more of the key players in our history, or in the history of the LGBT community here. And so I was kind of worried, like, how I was going to cram it all in. I think the first time I did the presentation, I was like, how am I going to talk for 1 hour? Like, I definitely don't have enough material for talk for 1 hour.
And now you have an abundance of info. You gotta know where to edit. And
yeah, so I think the last one was like, it was like 2 hours, and I struggled to keep it under that time.
Wow. So when you first started down this journey of learning the history, was it mostly through interviewing people, talking to people, or were you going back to any source materials, like maybe microfilm, newspaper?
No, I think that came a little later. So a lot of times I've had to explain to people that this isn't really something that you can Google or like go to the library and look up. I mean, like, there's portions of it in firsthand materials like newspapers, like, other archives. But it's definitely not something that's like all laid out in front of you. And so I've like definitely made some mistakes, because a lot of my understanding, especially initially, came from oral history interviews. And I don't remember what I did last week. I don't remember, I struggled to remember that the first time I did that presentation was in 2016. And so sometimes people don't remember dates. People don't necessarily like know that they're making history while they're just like living their lives.
Right.
And so they didn't always remember dates, for example, or certain stories got told differently in different people's interpretations, which is normal. And so it was definitely a struggle to sort of like piece together some of the different narratives. And part of that challenge was that I was relying a lot on oral history, which is great, but it's, it's subjective, and it's limited to people's memories, and people who have lived, 70 people who have, in their 60s and 70s have lived a lot and might not always remember this like one event in 1992 that I'm trying to.
And are you finding that when the more you speak, the more people who speak to, the more they're able to fill in those gaps, or somebody kind of mentions, vaguely remembers one thing, but then somebody else is like, oh yeah, I totally remember that. And it just kind of, it's all filling in the gaps and just kind of building it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So like one of the things that I was really, kind of proud of helping or piecing together was the story of the Rio Grande Valley's first Pride Month celebration in June of 1992. I was able to like interview, the more people I interviewed about it, the more I was able to sort of piece it all together. And then looking through some older material, I was able to just kind of string it all together. Two of the first people I interviewed, like you said, I started mostly with interviews. I have an older gay uncle who lives in Houston who grew up here, and interviewed him. Oscar Lopez, who works for the Valley AIDS Council, and two women, Alicia Lugo and Lori Coffey, who live in Harlingen, who were really, really involved in the community, especially in the 80s and 90s. And they gave me, there was a zine-style publication that was published in the Valley in the early 90s called In Touch Magazine. And through reading old issues of that, I was able to fill in some of the gaps too, that like maybe the oral history hadn't covered.
Nice. Yeah. So what I remember, especially speaking to Charlie and Ronnie when they were doing As I Walk Through the Valley, and I know it to be true because once they start talking to people bust out boxes of stuff that they've kept, whether it's old newspaper clippings or old zines or photographs or letters, what have you. But everybody seems to have that one box that they've tucked away somewhere, and just waiting for the moment somebody to come by and ask about it. And I mean, they're more than happy to like just go, share what they know and what they have. Have you found that to be the case?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Almost a lot of the people we've interviewed have that box of like photos and memorabilia. There's some people, some people that have like kept everything. Like there was one guy we interviewed, Carlos Villarreal. He's a local artist. He just had boxes and boxes of like, he never threw away like tickets to get into the gay clubs and like pictures from when he was a teenager. So those are gold, right? And sometimes they're sitting in people's homes and people don't know like the value of all those pictures and stuff. So I feel really honored when people share that with us.
Are y'all doing, I mean, I'm not sure what capacity y'all are able to, but are you all digitizing any of those old photos or flyers?
So yeah, we're scanning everything for the movie. Even if we don't use it all for the movie, it's still going to be awesome to have all of that digitized and archived. And one of my goals for the future is to have like a digital archive of like Valley LGBTQ history, so people can hold on to their photos, but other people can still look at what.
Nice.
They really are like these amazing snapshots of the community.
Right. So, so far, has anything really like just caught you off guard, completely surprised you? Like you were like blown away by?
Yeah. So, there's a few things. The level of activism that existed in the community, especially like in the 80s and 90s. I grew up not knowing about that at all. So, there's a few groups, activist groups here in the Valley. There was a group called Valley Voice that in the 80s and 90s was really sort of like really visible, and I think really groundbreaking for that reason in a place like the Valley. I was surprised, I think, I've talked about this a lot, but I had a gay uncle who I grew up knowing about, but he was murdered when I was really, really young, and I never met him. And I was surprised to learn about how involved with the community he was at different points. He owned a gay bar starting in the mid-'70s on Pecan and 11th Street. And just finding out, that he helped plan the first Pride celebration in the Valley and stuff like that was really cool. I think also it's been pretty amazing so like we interviewed Angela, who sometimes co-hosts with you. And Angela had some amazing stories about her time with Ink Bag and Angela and the X's, which was like an all-female queer punk band in the Valley. But she also had a queer uncle who died the same year that she was born.
Right.
And so she didn't really get to meet him, but he's always been like a big impact on her. And other people that we've interviewed who were part of the LGBT community themselves also had these stories of LGBTQ elders in their families. And it was really cool to see how often that happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've known Angela for over 20 years. I've known her entire family, and there was always talk about her uncle. There were a few photographs that were floating around, and, her mom would tell the stories when we'd all be hanging out. And so, I'm glad that this is coming out, that he's finally going to maybe, get some sort of recognition, or at least some form of, I don't know, just he was doing it back then, and finally it's going to come to light, which is, I think, is awesome.
Yeah, Angela had an amazing picture of him in drag in the early 1970s, and I mean, to be doing drag back then in a place like Edinburgh or McAllen, it was just incredible. And I think that's one of the other things that's been really surprising is I don't think this is something I really had an understanding of before going into working on the movie, that like queer people always find each other. Even it's so easy now with social media and with other stuff for queer people to connect, I think. But even going back to people we've interviewed who grew up in the 50s and 60s, just how often they found each other, I think is pretty amazing.
Right. That's really cool. And I mean, it's true. To wrap it up, when can we expect it to come out? I'm sure that's the $1 million question.
Yeah. So we're hoping to finish by definitely by the end of the year, and enter it into some film festivals and see how that process goes, and then definitely hoping to have a screening in the Valley, as soon as we can. Hopefully the end of 2019 or the beginning of 2020.
Okay, and you'll probably do the same thing as I Walk Through the Valley, where it'll play it down here, it'll play at film festivals.
Yeah, hopefully it'll get picked up by.
That's exciting.
Festivals.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
You can see a part of it. We're going to be showing a preview clip, a very rough cut sort of preview, just 10 to 15 minutes And that's something that's going to be a little bit of a challenge because we've gotten all these great interviews, right? We've interviewed over 50 people for this, and so to kind of like distill it down to just like a 10 or 15 minute preview is going to be a challenge for sure. But we'll be doing a rough preview at this year's Pride in the Park at the McAllen Convention Center on June 28th.
June 28th. Okay, so that's this month.
And you can follow us on our Instagram. It's at Pansy Pachanga, all one word. And our Facebook is Pansy Pachanga as well, and you can get updates that way.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. So I will be linking all of those down in the show notes for the episode. And Gabriel, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate your time. I know you're a very busy person. But thanks for enlightening us with some history here. And we're all looking forward to the documentary when it's done. I can't wait.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me.
Again, thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. You can find us anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast. And if you want to take that extra step in supporting us and being able to get more episodes out every month, head over to our online store where we have some cool shirts. We have all kinds of gear on there. So you'll be helping us and you'll be getting something back in return. You can always find us on Instagram, Facebook, under Rice Beans Revolution. Visit our website, www.ricebeansrevolution.net. where you can get a link to all our stuff. And again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.